Night. France. Rain on metal. You hear engines first. German engines. Deep, hungry, confident. Tanks. They're not even trying to be quiet. Why should they? It's 1944. The Allies are pushing east after the breakout from Normandy, and the German army, bled, angry, desperate, is falling back and trying to regroup. And one of the only things the Germans still really believe in is this: Panzers can still fix it. A Panzer division can still punch through, force a gap, slip out of an encirclement, get to safety, live to fight again. That's the plan. That's the routine. That's how it's supposed to go. Now picture this. On a narrow French road just before dawn, boxed in by stone walls and hedges and trees so thick they lean over the road like ribs, 30, maybe 40 Frenchmen. Not an armored brigade, not a full Allied corps, not a division. A handful are sitting in the dark. The unit is tiny, under-equipped, low on everything: fuel, ammo, sleep. Some of them aren't even regular army. Some are resistance fighters, macassards, who were living like ghosts in the woods a few weeks ago. And yet here they are now, with a job that sounds like a joke. Their job is to cut off a German Panzer division, to seal the road, to make armor stop, to tell heavy steel no. If you're already asking, how is that not suicide? Good, that's the right question, because that's where this story lives. This is not a story about big armies. This is not a story about generals pushing models around a map with sticks. This is a story about a little French blocking force, a scratch force, thrown across one road in the middle of one night in one corner of one retreat, and how that little nothing unit choked a German Panzer division so badly that it bent the shape of that entire sector of the retreat. Let's start a few steps back so we're all standing in the same place. Summer 1944, the Allies have landed in Normandy. D-Day is no longer a gamble, it's a fact. The Americans fight their way off the beaches and through hedgerow country. That brutal, claustrophobic brawl of field-to-field fighting in thick bocage, where every 200 meters costs men. Then finally comes the breakout. American armor punches through at places like Saint-Lô and Avranches. They stop grinding forward yard by yard and start moving. Fast. The front, which was once slow and chewing and stuck, suddenly turns liquid. German units in the West, especially their armored forces, are in danger of getting surrounded. Not pushed back, surrounded, encircled, destroyed in place. The Germans know this. They're not stupid. They're not blind. They understand what's happening, so they start pulling back, hard. They need to get east. They need to get through the bottlenecks. They need to get their Panzer divisions out before the trap closes. Now here's where the terrain matters, and terrain always matters. France isn't open desert here. It's villages, crossroads, narrow departmental roads, old stone bridges, river crossings. That means if you're a German armored column, you can't just go anywhere you want. You can't just say, drive around that. You are stuck to certain roads. You have to pass through certain choke points. And if somebody smart and fast gets in front of you and blocks one of those choke points, you're not delayed. You're trapped, not slowed, cut off. This is how you kill something bigger than you. You don't go head on and try to beat it in a duel. You put a cork in the bottle and dare it to drink. Enter the French. By this point in the war, late 44, France is not quiet. It's awake. The resistance isn't just blowing up a rail line here and there anymore. They're coordinating with Allied armor, with American infantry, with British paras, with reconnaissance units. Some resistance groups have been up-armed. They have real weapons now. Piats, bazookas, explosives, light vehicles, radio contact. Some of them are now basically light infantry. Some of them are now something nastier. Mobile roadblocks. And that's what this little French unit is. They're the knife in the artery. They've been told, hold this road. Doesn't matter if you're outnumbered. Doesn't matter if they've got tanks. If you hold this, you stall them. If you stall them, they bunch up. If they bunch up, we hit them from the air and from the flanks. If that happens, that German division is done. Not pushed back. Done. That's the mission. That's the math. Now let's zoom all the way in and sit with them. It's still dark. They've felled trees across the road. They've dragged old farm carts into place. They've mined part of the approach with whatever explosives they've been able to scrounge. They've got rifles wrapped in cloth so they don't glint. They've got machine guns set low, at ankle height, not chest height, because they're aiming for drivers, for tracks, for radiators, not for hero shots. They've got 1 or 2 anti-tank weapons, not a whole battery, not enough to go gun to gun with heavy armor in a fair fight, just enough to give a Panzer something to worry about in the first seconds of contact. They've also got something else, intention. And intention in a fight like this is more dangerous than armor, because armor wants to pass through, and these men are here to deny passage. If you've ever seen a dog that refuses to heel and plants itself in a doorway and shows you, "This is mine," you know that feeling. Scale that to tanks. That's what you're looking at. These are not men on patrol. These are not men raiding. These are men who have walked forward, taken a breath and said, "We live here now. This is our ground until either you stop or we die." That's a different psychology. That's a wall. Now down the road, you've got German armor, Panzer division. That means tanks, yes, but not just tanks. It's also half-tracks, motorized infantry, self-propelled guns, logistics trucks, fuel carriers, field repair units. A Panzer division is teeth and stomach and spine and blood vessels, all moving together. And they're in a hurry. That makes them dangerous, but it also makes them predictable. They do not expect serious resistance at this particular choke point. Why would they? The French army is supposed to be broken. The resistance is supposed to be hit and run. The Americans and British, sure, they're trouble, but they're supposed to be coming from behind, not standing in front like a brick wall. So when they see a roadblock, what do they assume? That it's symbolic, something villagers threw together, a gesture, something they'll just shove aside with the first tank. They're about to find out otherwise. The French are waiting quiet. Breath fogs, hands flex on grips. Throats are dry. Hearts are loud, not poetic loud, physically loud. You can hear your own pulse in your mouth when you're waiting for armor. Then the first tank noses around the bend. Big, loud, confident. You can feel it, more than hear it, in your bones. The French let it come. They don't open up too early. Amateurs shoot early. Pros wait. Why? Because you don't waste your first shot to make noise. You spend it to make effect. So they wait, and wait, and wait, until the lead German vehicle is committed, forward of cover, too close to stop cleanly, not yet angled to pull back. That's when they hit it. The first shot goes into the lead vehicle hard. Track, driver's position, engine block. Depends on what weapon they've got. But the job is always the same. Stop the lead vehicle in the road. Kill its movement. Make it sideways. Make it dead. Make it burning. Doesn't matter. Just make it a plug. Because that does something catastrophic to the whole German column. It turns every tank behind it into a prisoner of the road. You cannot surge forward because the lead tank is blocking. You cannot fan out because the road is narrow and the hedgerows and ditches and stone walls are like cages. You cannot reverse in seconds because it takes time to communicate reverse, reverse, reverse down a mixed column. In other words, one knocked out vehicle in the right place at the right time can paralyze an entire armored battle group. You don't have to kill them all. You just have to trap them all. That's exactly what happens. The first Panzer lurches, sparks metal scream, maybe fire, and the whole German column behind it, all that power, all that noise, all that weight, suddenly locks up in one narrow French lane like a metal snake that just took a bullet to the skull. And in that one frozen second, that's when the little French unit opens up for real. Machine guns, rifles, grenades. Grenades tossed not at tanks. Grenades tossed at truck cabs, radio vehicles, fuel carriers. You know what's more important than a gun in a moving column? Gas. You light fuel, you light panic. You light panic, you light delay. And a delay is what this whole mission is about. You're not trying to defeat a Panzer division. You're trying to fix it. Pin it in place, hold it, long enough for the rest of the war to come crashing down on its head. Now imagine being in one of those German trucks, in the dark, engine idling, waiting your turn to move forward. Then the lead tank jolts. You hear a metallic impact that is not normal. Before you can process that, tracer fire rips past the windshield. Someone up ahead is screaming. Someone just shouted, "Find! Find! Enemy!" And then, a second later, the air around you is snapping with rifle fire coming from hedges you thought were empty. That's not combat. That's ambush inside a funnel. The Germans scramble to respond. Tanks try to traverse turrets. Infantry try to dismount and fan out. Officers shout to flank left, flank right. But left and right are hedgerows, and those hedgerows are mined and wired and watched. And the French are not charging. They're not doing anything cinematic. They're not running out of cover, waving flags and yelling, "Vive la France!" They're doing something way colder. They're staying in concealment and targeting anything that looks like command and control. Radio men? Hit them. Officers leaning out of half-track hatches, pointing? Hit them. NCOs trying to rally a squad to push forward? Hit them. You can't move a Panzer division as one mind if you start shooting out the nerves. So that's what they do. That's what this small French force does. They go for nerves, because they're not trying to rack up body count. They're trying to steal time. Now here's where it gets even dirtier. The Germans, once they realize this isn't amateurs popping a few shots for glory, get vicious fast. They bring main guns to bear. They start blasting the hedgerows with high explosive shells. They fire Koch's machine guns into anything that looks like a bush big enough to hide a man. They try to brute force the ambush, and they do hurt the French. It's not one-sided. There is shrapnel in the air that will never be found. There is dirt hitting faces and getting in mouths. There is a scream that doesn't stop. This isn't one of those clean miracle stories. People die here. But while this chaos is exploding in the dark, two things are happening at the same time. One, that road is blocked and staying blocked. Two, word is moving. Because this little French unit isn't alone mentally. They're on radio to the nearest Allied armor and air. They're feeding a message. German armored column here, pinned, grid reference. Repeat, pinned. And that's the real kill shot. Because once you've got a Panzer division stuck nose to tail on a single road, you know what an Allied fighter bomber loves more than anything? A line of vehicles that cannot scatter. You're not just a unit anymore. You're a target list. You're lunch. And in 1944, the Allies owned the sky in a way they did not in 1940. So the clock starts. All the French have to do is stay alive, keep the road blocked, keep the Germans from blowing the obstacle out of the way and surging forward for a few more minutes. Those minutes are brutal. The Germans start trying everything. They send small assault teams forward, on foot, crawling, trying to get explosive charges onto the wreck, blocking the road so they can blow it and drag it and force a lane. The French engage them at close range, and this part is ugly. This part is personal. You are shooting men at distances where you can hear the breath tear out of their throat when you hit them. You are moving positions between shots because if you stay in place more than 6 seconds, you die. You are reloading with fingers that don't feel like fingers anymore. And all the while in the back of your head, you are repeating the mission like a prayer. Hold, hold, hold. And then the sound changes. You hear it before you see it. A kind of ripping snarl from above. Not artillery, not tank guns. Aircraft, Allied fighter bombers arriving. That's the payoff. Because now the Germans are no longer fighting just the French in the hedgerows. Now they're stuck in packed vehicles while angry little attack planes start diving down and spitting rockets and 20mm cannon fire and dropping small bombs into a fixed column. And let me tell you something. A Panzer is scary. A Panzer backed by infantry is scarier. But a Panzer that cannot move, being bracketed from the air, while men on the ground keep you from breaking contact? That's a coffin with engine trouble. That's the nightmare. And that's exactly what this little French unit buys, with trees across a road, with one good first shot, with discipline, with patience, with nerve. They hold that bottleneck long enough for Allied air and follow-on ground elements to pile in. And now what was supposed to be an orderly German withdrawal becomes something much nastier, a defeat in motion. Vehicles burning, crews abandoning armor. Roads jammed not with fighting strength, but with wrecks. Maps being redrawn on the hood of a truck in the middle of chaos, while someone screams that they're running low on fuel, and someone else screams that there's no room to maneuver, and someone else is telling everyone to just push forward, just push forward, just push forward, and there is no forward left. This is when the German Panzer Division stops being a Panzer Division in the clean, proud sense and starts being a collection of survivors trying not to get swallowed. You know how officers talk about combat effectiveness? This is how you erase it, not by killing every single tank, by cutting the spine, by freezing it at the wrong moment in the wrong place, and letting time and fire do the rest. Now here's the part almost nobody talks about because it doesn't have a big flag in the famous books. That French unit, they don't get parades right then. They don't get broadcast medals. A lot of them don't even get their names written in a daily log in ink that survives the week. Because on paper, what happened that night just looks like this. German armored force delayed at such and such road. Enemy suffered heavy losses in subsequent counter-air and ground action. Enemy encirclement tightened in sector. Allied advance continues. That's it. That's the summary. That's the line. No emotion, no detail, no 30 men with more guts than ammunition, just slowed a steel fist long enough to let the rest of us cut the wrist. But that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And you can feel, if you really look at those reports, what it meant. Because what it meant is this. Instead of slipping out, regrouping, and later counterattacking in good order against advancing American or British columns, that German armored group got bogged, mauled, shoved, chewed, and then snapped off. Gone. A whole enemy force or intended to still be useful a week from now, instead bled out where it wasn't supposed to. And when you zoom out to the bigger map, that loss matters. Because this phase of the war, the breakout, the race across France, is all about momentum and containment. If the Germans can maintain organized pockets of armor and use them to punch at Allied flanks, delay crossings, hit supply lines, force pauses, then every mile becomes expensive. Every bridge becomes a hard fight. Every town costs another day. But if you can pin those German armored pockets in place, crack them, capture or destroy them, and keep them from reforming as coherent striking tools, then what happens is what Eisenhower and Bradley and Montgomery and Patton all want. Collapse. Not battle, collapse. Movement without resistance. Columns rolling forward faster than the Germans can build a wall to stop them. And do you know where collapse starts? It starts in little places, on little roads, with little units, with stop them here. I don't care how many you've got, just stop them here. So yeah, history looks at entire campaigns and maps with arrows on them and says, here the Germans retreated, here they were encircled, here this division was lost. But the truth inside that arrow is this. A couple dozen Frenchmen laid trees across a road in the dark, held their ground against steel, and refused to move out of the way. They didn't have the numbers. They didn't have the vehicles. They didn't have the armor. What they had was something the German Panzer Division did not have anymore. Freedom to choose. The Germans had one road. The French chose to own that road. And by owning that one narrow strip of ground for that one brutal slice of night and dawn, they stole hours. Those hours turned into airstrikes. Those airstrikes turned into wrecked armor and burned fuel. Burned fuel turned into immobile columns. Immobile columns turned into encirclement. Encirclement turned into surrender and destruction. Destruction of that one panzer formation meant that 2 days later, an American mechanized column crossed a bridge it might not have crossed otherwise, on schedule instead of behind schedule. And that timing change, that matters, because the war in that phase is a race. If you arrive first, you surround. If you arrive late, you fight. That little French unit helped the Allies arrive first. So let's sit with them one last time after it's over. Smoke hanging low over the hedgerows. The road still blocked. The air thick with that burned oil, burned rubber, burned paint smell you never forget. Dead quiet except for something still crackling in a ruined engine block and the occasional ping of cooling metal. Adrenaline is dumping out of their systems now, and that's when the shakes hit. That's when the coughing starts. That's when someone finally says water like it's the first word invented. They're low on ammo. They're missing people. They're bruised, deafened, scorched, bleeding, and they've done it. They actually did it. They held. They look at each other in disbelief. Nobody makes a speech. Nobody shouts victory. They're too tired for that. One of them maybe just says a single line in French, something like, "Ça ira. It'll go. It'll be okay." And that's enough. That's the ceremony. Because for them right now, it's not about medals. It's not about glory. It's about the fact that there are German tanks behind them, farther back down that road, that are not going anywhere ever again. It's about the knowledge that they, a unit nobody would have written songs about a month earlier, just cut the throat of something everyone on their side had been scared of since 1940. German armor, the thing that rolled across France 4 years ago like thunder, the thing that made people run. Tonight, it's the thing that ran into them and stopped. Here's the part I want you to remember. In World War II, we talk about the big names, the big battles. Stalingrad, Midway, El Alamein, Normandy. We talk about generals. We talk about divisions. But in between the big arrows on the map, there are these little knife points. Moments where a small group, part regular, part resistance, barely supplied, stands in the middle of a road and says no, and means it. And because of that no, an entire armored formation that was supposed to escape does not escape. A counterattack that was supposed to happen never happens. A bridge that was supposed to be blown stays standing. A town that was supposed to be retaken by the Germans stays in Allied hands. And from that point on, the German retreat doesn't look like a fighting withdrawal anymore. It looks like a collapse. And collapse is how wars end. This is one of those knife points. This is one of those moments. A little French unit, born out of anger and hunger and stubborn pride, and what was left of a nation that refused to stay on its knees, took on a Panzer division, not in some romantic open-field duel, but by thinking like a wall, by deciding which road mattered and then owning that road with their lives. That's it. That's the story. You want to know how you beat something bigger than you in war? This is how. You don't outgun it, you outdecide it. And in the dark, in the rain, on that French road that night, that's exactly what they did. Hold that frame. Dark road, wet stone, burned metal still clicking as it cools. Now widen it, because what happened on that single stretch of French asphalt didn't stay on that road. It spread, it echoed, it bent things. We're going to walk through exactly how, and we're going to end with the part people never say out loud, but every survivor understands. Let's move forward a few hours. It's morning now. Gray light, not real sun yet. The air is thick with cordite stink and that chemical taste you get in the back of your throat after explosions. Hot metal and dust and something almost sweet from burned fuel. It's in your teeth. It stays there. The French blocking unit is still at the choke point. They haven't left. Not because they're stubborn for fun, but because you don't walk away from a wound you just opened. You hold it until someone with bandages and doctors and vehicles shows up. Same on a battlefield. You don't just ambush and go. Not today, not after this. You hold, you control, you hand the damage off. That's the job now. Allied armor, American, British, is arriving from the West. Not in parade order, in hunter order. They've been racing all night to close the pocket, and they're rolling in mean, dirty, low on sleep, covered in mud, loaded with dust. What do they see? They see German armor stopped where it shouldn't be stopped. They see German trucks burned out and nose to tail and sideways, stuck across a narrow departmental road that was supposed to be an escape lane. They see wounded German crewmen sitting on embankments with that stunned, empty look men get when everything they believed about momentum just evaporated. And, crucially, and this matters more than anybody says in the pretty summaries, they see proof. Proof that the Germans are not slipping out clean. Proof that the retreat is not controlled, fighting withdrawal. Proof that the German Panzer forces are not gliding away to strike again tomorrow. They're bleeding out here. They're being harvested in pieces. That visual, that moment, that is powerful. For morale, for command decisions, for how aggressively the Allies will push the encirclement now. And that brings us to the word nobody likes, but every commander uses. exploitation. In doctrine speak, once a blocking force fixes an enemy in place, pins him, you exploit. You bring in more force. You hit him while he's stalled. You widen the break. You don't give him a chance to breathe, reorganize, counterpunch. That's what happens next. The French unit did the fixing. Now the Allies exploit. American tank destroyers pull up, angle in, and start methodically punching any German vehicle that still looks like it can move. They're not flashy about it. Just calm, deliberate shots. A round into a transmission housing here. A round into an engine block there. Another into a half-track that looks like it's still got a working radio antenna. They're not wasting shells on things that are already ruined. They're erasing anything that could still help the Germans later today. British reconnaissance elements dismount and start clearing hedgerows with a professional coldness that only comes from having done this way too many times in Normandy. Riflemen sweep up any German infantry who tried to scatter into the ditches overnight and are now huddled in the brush, shaking, thinking about surrender. And here's something ugly but true. If you're German and you thought you were retreating, not surrendering, and now you're caught, surrounded, disarmed, and marched back past a road full of your own burning armor, that does something to you. You don't walk away from that saying, "We'll regroup and strike back at noon." You walk away saying nothing. Now let's zoom out one more ring, because this is where the little unit stops a Panzer division. Story stops being just a crazy anecdote and turns into a strategic hinge. There's a bigger picture here. At this moment in 1944, after the Allied breakout from Normandy, the German high command in the West is trying to avoid something catastrophic, a complete encirclement of their forces in France, what later gets called the Falaise Pocket. That's the nightmare. Tens of thousands of troops, armor, supplies, senior officers, all trapped and hammered from all sides until there's nothing left but twisted steel and marching columns of prisoners. If the Germans can get their armor out through a few key escape routes, they can keep some kind of armored reserve alive. They can slow the Allied dash east. They can defend the Seine. They can turn collapse into fighting retreat. If they can't, game over in the West. Fast, no pause, no reset. No, we'll stabilize on the next river line. And here's the part nobody tells you in the clean summaries. Whether that happens, whether the Germans save their armor or lose it, doesn't just depend on big divisions clashing on a broad front. It depends on little choke points like this. Because if even one armored column gets stopped at the wrong road, at the wrong hour for just long enough, then that column doesn't make it out of the pocket. And if it doesn't make it out, that's fewer tanks, fewer half-tracks, fewer experienced NCOs and officers who know how to run mechanized warfare, fewer radios, fewer fuel bowsers, fewer spare parts. You don't just lose vehicles, you lose the ability to punch back tomorrow. That's what was bought here in the dark by a force that, on paper, wasn't supposed to matter. Now let's talk about who they actually were, because this is important. When people say little French unit, it sounds vague, almost cute, like a movie cliché. Number. This is what these guys really were. Some were formal French forces of the interior, the FFI. That's essentially the unified resistance, now wearing armbands and in some sectors, working openly with the Allies. Some were maquisards, rural guerrillas. They knew every ditch, every hedgerow, every farm track, every orchard wall and drainage cut in that part of France. They had lived there, fought there, hidden there, starved there. Some were gendarmes, rural police, the same men who, a year ago, had to pretend to cooperate with occupying forces because they had families under German eyes. The minute it was possible, they turned their local knowledge and weapons and vehicles against the occupiers they'd been smiling at in public. Some were guys who were farmers last month. Literally, they weren't drafted, they weren't ordered, they were told, "We need that road shut," and they said, "Give me a rifle." Some had never fired an anti-tank weapon at a living thing, only at scrap hulks out in a field during a rush demonstration. Now imagine being that guy and watching a German armored column round a bend in real life. Imagine keeping your hands steady anyway. You feel that? That's courage with dirt under its nails. That's what was at the roadblock. And this right here is why who matters, Because Germany in 1940 walked into France like a storm. Tanks, Stukas, motorized infantry. The blitzkrieg the world couldn't stop yet. A lot of the world decided in 1940 that French resistance was a myth. French backbone was a myth. French will to fight was a myth. The Germans definitely believed that. They carried that arrogance right into 1944. Frenchmen, guerrillas, they're an inconvenience, not a threat. We'll brush them away. This road said, not anymore. That matters psychologically. That breaks assumptions. That steals confidence. Now here's something that will not show up in most books, but veterans talk about it, and it's real. After the fight, after Allied armor pushes through the shattered column, after wounded are gathered and prisoners are walked back under guard with hands on helmets, you'll see a quiet little moment. An American tanker, still wired from combat, hands black with grease and powder, will look at one of these French fighters. This guy in mixed gear, no proper uniform, face smeared with dirt and carbon, chest still heaving, and that American will say something like, "You boys did this?" And the French fighter, who probably hasn't slept in 2 days and is still vibrating with leftover adrenaline, will just shrug. That shrug right there is France standing back up. That shrug is, we are not done. We are not weak. We are in this now. People talk about the liberation of France, and they mean flags and crowds and kisses and American jeeps rolling into Paris with kids cheering. But liberation also looks like this. A French road where French men stop German armor with their own hands. That's liberation. That's what it physically looks like. Now, let's talk results, because results are the only language generals truly respect. What did this roadblock actually achieve once the smoke cleared and the wrecks cooled and the bodies were counted and the reports got typed? 3 things. First, delay. The German Panzer formation lost hours. Those hours would have been used to maneuver east, cross rivers, find new defensive positions, refuel, rearm, and restore some kind of order. Instead, they burned those hours dying in place. That alone is huge. Second, loss of material. Tanks, half-tracks, fuel carriers, ammunition trucks, command vehicles, killed, abandoned, captured, and not in a repair depot where you can salvage them later. On a road under air attack, in a choke point. That means those vehicles aren't coming back. That means that Panzer division, on paper still a Panzer division, just became a crippled formation. You don't regrow that in a week. You don't replace that mid-retreat. That's gone. Third, loss of cohesion. This one's invisible in a spreadsheet, but fatal in real war. Cohesion is the ability to act like one creature, to execute orders as a coordinated whole, to strike, withdraw, regroup, and sink. This ambush shattered that. Officers dead or cut off, radios out, vehicles stuck and burning, columns fragmented. What crawled away from that fight wasn't a sharp armored spear, it was shards. And shards don't counterattack. Shards don't threaten a flank 48 hours later. Shards don't turn pursuit into stalemate. Shards hide. Shards run. That's what the French bought for the Allies. A Panzer division that became shards, which means this. When Allied High Command looked at the map that afternoon and said, "Can we keep tightening the encirclement? Can we keep pushing? Can we risk being aggressive?" The answer was yes. Because one of the things that could have stopped them, a coordinated German armored punch on a key road, wasn't coming anymore. It had died in a hedgerow at dawn, killed by a unit that doesn't even get a proper box on the map. Now let's go back to those men, because when the adrenaline crash hits, a lot of fighters don't feel like heroes. They feel honestly kind of sick. The shaking starts in the hands, then in the jaw. Some of them can't hold a canteen without rattling water down their own sleeve. Some are suddenly freezing even though it's summer. That's shock. And then something else kicks in, something that isn't in the official histories. Guilt. Survivor's guilt. Because not everybody in that little French force walked away. Some of them are lying exactly where they were when the first tank rounded the corner. Some of them are under ponchos now. And nobody in that moment is saying, "It was worth it." Not out loud. That comes later. Right now, it's just quiet. Sometimes somebody tries to make a joke. The joke comes out wrong. They laugh anyway, because otherwise they'll cry hard enough they won't stop. That's war's other truth. The big strategic gain always rides on private grief. The medals get pinned to living chess. The real cost stays under canvas. So how does this end? Let's walk it to the finish line. By nightfall, that road is in Allied hands. The wrecks are being pushed aside. Bulldozers are carving a lane. Recovery crews are dragging twisted German metal into the ditches so new Allied columns can keep rolling east without losing tempo. Because that's the whole point. Don't stop the advance. Exploit, exploit, exploit. The French unit that held the choke point is pulled back. Some of them are folded into regular French forces that will keep fighting toward the German border. Some of them get patched up and sent right back out to block another road tomorrow night. Because guess what? This wasn't the only route the Germans were trying to use. Some of them just disappear back into the villages. They don't have uniforms, remember? They don't have payroll paperwork. They go home, if home still exists. They wash blood out of their sleeves in a metal basin. They sit at a kitchen table that still has a tablecloth because their mother or sister or wife or aunt insisted on normal things staying normal. They eat bread with hands that are still black under the nails. They don't talk about it. How do you say at a dinner table, "We stopped tanks"? How do you even form that sentence with your mouth without sounding insane? You don't. You just say, "It was bad, but we're okay." And that becomes memory, and that memory becomes myth, and that myth gets told smaller and smaller every year until it almost vanishes. That's why we're here, to unvanish it. Because here's the truth. When you read German armored forces were encircled and destroyed in Western France in August 1944, it sounds inevitable. It was not inevitable. It was earned hour by hour on little roads like this one, by little units like this one. Units that said, "We're the line, right here. US, we're enough." We always say the Allies won because of industrial might, air superiority, logistics, numbers. All true, but zoom in. You'll see moments where war turns not on tonnage, but on nerve. Not on factories, but on a handful of humans who decided a certain piece of ground would not be surrendered today. That's what happened on that French road. A Panzer division tried to leave. A country that the Germans thought was broken told them, no, and no held. So when we talk about World War II, the giant arrows, the massive battles, the speeches and the flags and the monuments, remember this. Sometimes the hinge of history is a muddy farm road, a fallen tree, a single wrecked tank sideways across a lane, and 20 or 30 human beings who refuse to move. That refusal cost the German army armor it could never replace. That missing armor cost them a counterattack they never launched. That missing counterattack let Allied columns drive faster, surround more tightly, and end the fight in France weeks sooner than they might have. And ending it weeks sooner means fewer villages shelled, fewer bridges blown, fewer civilians caught in retreat fire, fewer names hammered into stone later. That matters. That's not small. That's the job. That's the legacy. And here's how we'll close. When you study the war, you'll read about great offensives, brilliant commanders, decisive operations. But tucked inside those headlines are nights like this one. A handful of French fighters, some in mismatched boots and jackets, some with resistance armbands still tied at the bicep, kneeling in a hedgerow in the rain, hearts hammering, waiting for the shape of a German tank to slide out of the dark. Knowing exactly what's coming, knowing exactly how ugly it could get, not running, not folding, not making a speech, just waiting. And when that first tank shows and the moment is real and there's no going back, they pull the trigger and history moves. That's the truth. That's the spine under the pretty maps. That's the reason the big arrows point the way they point. And in the end, that's what wins wars. Not just strength, not just steel, but a small group of people on a bad night, in the rain, on a narrow French road, who decide that this is where the enemy stops.